So you crafted your game's UI and it looks great. But your playtesters send you screenshots like this, or this, or, well, even this. Hi, I'm Christina. Let's talk about anchoring elements in your UI. Let's rewind time for a moment. I have a minimap for my space game I want to display in the top right corner. So I create a new image, handed my placeholdery, put minimap here graphic to it, and drag it to the top right corner of my canvas. In game view, I already set it to display my game in 1920 by 1080, so when I switch over from scene view, this looks correct. Awesome! But when I send it to a friend, I suddenly get this screenshot in return. Huh, what happened? Well, my friend has a monitor set to 4K Ultra HD, which looks really cool, but it seems to break my UI. If we use this workflow of creating an element and positioning it on our canvas, we set the elements on our UI to explicit coordinates on the screen in relation to the center of the chosen resolution size. You can see that while dragging, for example. You get one value telling you how far on the X and how far on the Y value you are away from your resolutions and thus canvas's center. If I place my image in the top right corner like this, setting on some value above 400 on X and more than 300 pixels above the center and switch my preview resolution to 800 by 600, my image won't show up on screen anymore. Likewise, if my player's monitor resolution exceeds the typical 1920 by 1080, my image will set at the seemingly random position that will look random to your player. All these calculations are based on the center of your canvas, because Unity's anchoring system defaults to calculate position based on center and use definitive values for distances. Let's switch back to 1920 by 1080 in the game's dropdown and set the values inside our rect transform by hand this time. 800 on position X, 400 on position Y look like a good position relative to the center for a minimap. Let's left-click on this graph-looking thing and we'll get the probably most complex menu when it comes to Unity's UI system, but it looks much more intimidating than it really is. A simple left-click opens this menu to a version that lets you pick from where the placement of the element should be calculated, and that means also where it should be placed and anchored. As mentioned, it defaults to middle center, as visualized and labeled by this indicator. Click on top right, as that means we want our element to be anchored based on its position from the top right corner of the screen's resolution. Our 800 by 400 with a marker in the middle now turned into a -160 and -140 with the indicator sitting in the top right corner. Also, the visual of the graph changed. Now switch back to the game view and switch through the drop-down's resolutions. No matter how big or small your resolution is, the minimap will be displayed at the top right corner with a distance of 160 on X and 140 on Y on the respective axes. We will come back to this in a moment. Next, I want to implement some kind of top bar with an overview of resources. This bar should always span the whole width of the screen. I place a new image inside my canvas and will just keep the default square graphic with a different color. It should be 50 pixels high. I left-click on the graph again, and to the side are a few choices for stretching the screen. The top one looks like what I have in mind. But, this doesn't look right. What happened? The rect transform now gives a left and right value, and the flower-looking indicator is suddenly split into two halves. It reads 910 from the left, 910 from the right. And if we change through the resolutions, we can see our graphic tries to stretch in such a way that its left side will start at 900 pixels from the left side and ends at 900 pixels to the right. That's not what we had in mind for a top bar spanning the whole screen, is it? It could look nice if we want to have an empty space to the left and right of it, though, so let's keep that in mind. Back in scene view, left-click the graph again and hold Alt. The preview indicator will change. Click the Stretch Top icon again. It will now correctly stretch the whole width of each resolution, including the small ones which wouldn't let us have 910 empty pixels to the left and right. We could have gotten the same result by a simple click and entering O to the left, O to the right, and half the height of our element on pulse Y, this time minus to have it all visible. But by holding Alt and clicking on our choice, these calculations will be made for us. Basically, left-clicking and choosing where to anchor elements will give us all the needed functionality, but we have to enter everything ourselves. Holding Alt and clicking will keep the functionality but offer a few shortcuts for elements we use the most often. So, what do you think we would need to position this lower bar at the bottom of our screen? It's 150 pixel high and should keep 250 pixels of empty space to either side. Two ways. We can left-click and choose Stretch Bottom, enter 250 to the left and right, and for pos Y, we need to calculate the height of our element divided by 2. The other way would mean Alt-clicking Stretch Bottom and entering 250 to the left and right. The rest will be calculated for us. But why are we constantly dividing by 2 here? That's because the position of our element will be calculated from its center, its pivot point. It's the blue circle in each UI graphic. If you can't see it, click on this button to show Rectool-specific helpers. Let's select our top bar for this. It has 0 to the left and right, a height of 50, and a position of -25. 25 because the pivot is at its center, and to have the image visible on screen for its complete height, it needs to be moved down by 25 pixels, so -25. If you set it to 0, you can see half of the graphic sticking out at the top of the canvas, which will not be displayed. But sometimes having the pivot set at the center of the UI element is not intuitive or even helpful when recreating a design we built in a different app in Unity. So we can set the pivot to a different point, one we can more easily understand, or one that just feels much more correct. For the top bar, that would be the top edge of the graphic, for example. We can either click on the circle and move it by mouse, or enter a different value under the pivot-related part of the rect component. Now we get the pos Y to set to a more intuitive 0. So let's see how we can make sure our minimap will always be positioned at 50 pixels to the left and 100 pixels from the top based on the top right corner of our screen. I click on the map graphic, set the pivot to 1 on X and 1 on Y, and can then manually set the desired distance. Another effect of this pivot is that it determines from where width and height are being calculated in the first place. So if our pivot is in the top right corner and we set the width and height values of our minimap to something else, the image will grow to the left and down direction, while our pinned pivot location stays where it is. This is super useful for any kind of UI element that will change size depending on its contents, for example. This resetting of pivot points also has a shortcut. When the anchoring menu is open, you can hold Shift in either version, and not only will our anchoring be set up, but the pivot will also be set based on the anchoring location. Have to say though, I use this rarely, as most elements need a little bit more fine-tuning when it comes to the position of their pivots. But let's say we want to have a menu at the top left corner, right under our top bar. It should also have its pivot set to the top left corner, so it will only ever grow to the bottom right direction. Create a new image and set its initial height and width. Left-click, hold Shift and Alt, and choose top left corner. It will be crammed right into it. To set it below our top bar, enter position Y -50, as we know the top bar is 50 pixel high and we want to move down. Awesome. So, to practice, create a quest tracking overlay box. It's 300 pixel wide, 200 pixel high at its default state. It should be positioned 50 pixels from the right side of the monitor and be located someplace below our minimap. Also, it will probably grow in length, as all quest trackers are bound to do. How would you set this up? Pause for a moment and give it a try. There are multiple ways, so let's have a look at 2. I Alt-Shift-click on the top right corner because I want to make sure its location is similarly anchored as the minimap, and it will always stay roughly below it no matter the final size of the resolution. I could have set it to Alt-Left Edge too, but this might make the space between map and top of box more flexible. Both works, it just depends on your goal. Next I enter the values. -50 to the left, so its right side lines up with the right side of the minimap. Due to both having their pivot point in the top right corner, position Y depends on the size of the minimap. Mine's 200 pixel high, so for the quest tracker, I want it to be 30 pixel below that. This means the position Y of my tracker will be minus 330. A different way would have been right-clicking on the anchoring menu and choosing the top right corner, changing the pivot's location to 1 on X, 1 on Y, setting pos X of the tracker to minus 50, pos Y to minus 330. You can get the same result in every version of the anchoring system. It's really that Shift and Alt provide a few nice shortcuts for typical workflows. Learned something new here? Leave a like! So we now have anchored our UI in space, and it looks fine on all of our supported resolutions. Because you might already have guessed or seen during testing, some resolutions just won't work. For example, good old 800 by 600 quite literally renders our UI unusable. You will need to figure out which resolution size is the smallest one you'll have to take into account and support for your project because of this. But what about the contents of our boxes? Headlines, texts, icons, all the important ones. Well, watch this video again and just switch out the mention for canvas with container, really. Let's create a very basic info window to see how this works. Create an empty game object on our canvas and call it info window. If you create it outside the canvas, the next elements won't show up. Just drag it into the canvas if that happens to you. Set its size to 500 by 700. Create a background by creating an image, giving it some darkish color, left-clicking on the anchor menu, holding Alt and clicking Stretch in every direction. This fills your whole 500 by 700 container with a background image. Also, if you now change the width and height of your container, the background will resize in accordance. Create a new image we will use as our window header, 70 pixels high and anchored to the top, stretching the whole width, which means Alt-Shift-Click on top stretch. Next comes some kind of image fitting to the contents of our windows. Create a new image inside the container, give it a height of 400 pixel, Alt-Shift-Left-Click, stretch top with a position Y of minus 70. This will position it right below our top bar. A headline. Create a TextMesh Pro object inside your window container. A height of 40 works well for the default font size of TextMesh Pro. This, again, should stretch, but we want to leave 25 pixels to the left and right empty. For the pos Y, add the height of the headline bar and the image on top, plus a bit of space. Minus 490 works well in my case. And we'll need some sort of info text, of course. For the sake of this tutorial, it will just be static and not resized depending on content length. Create yet another TMP object, fill it with some example text, a good font size, and remember to set the height of this element so all the text fits into it. Shift, left-click, stretch top, 25 pixels to the left, 25 to the right, and position it below the headline. To round it off, we want to add two buttons. First, move the container's pivot to the top. I set mine to center. Move it so it's positioned minus 100 from the top. That way it's at the same height as our minimap. Extend it downwards a little. A height of 800 will work fine for this. As you can see, all of our elements will stay where we anchored them from the top. The window just grows below and in length. Create a button TextMesh Pro. This time we want to anchor it to the bottom of our window, but it should be flush with the left side of our text boxes and be 25 pixels from the bottom. Just guess how? Shift, Alt, left-click, bottom left. This puts our pivot also in the bottom left corner. Pos X is 25, just like with our text boxes. Pos Y is 25 as well. Duplicate this button and try anchoring it to the bottom right, just this time with 25 pixel space to its right. Shift, Alt, left-click, bottom right. Pos X minus 25, Pos Y 25. Lastly, put a descriptive text to your header bar, this time anchored to the top left and a close button anchored to the top right, just like we did with the two buttons below. Now, if we change the width and height of our window, our images, text boxes, and button positions will expand, shrink, and reposition as needed, and overflow each other if our window gets too cramped. Well, building a window with some size limits and responsive sizing is the topic of a different future video, as it goes beyond just simple anchoring. But to put at least some limits on this component, add a layout element to the container and set its preferred size to 500 by 700. The exact sizes depend on your needs, these are just my examples. Then add a content size for the component and set both values to preferred size. This way, your window will always use the preferred sizes you set in the layout element, making resizing easy and keeping us from accidentally resizing without noticing. And lastly, of course, check each supported resolution if it still works. Well, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on UI anchoring. If you're looking for a small, welcoming community, you are very welcome to join my Discord. Have a great week!